The mistake wasn't in the numbers. It was in who everyone trusted to read them. The email sat at the top of the screen, unread by most, ignored by all, except one name no one recognized. Emily Carter. Waitress. 6 hours earlier, the room had been filled with quiet confidence, the kind that only comes from people who believe they've already won. Crystal glasses caught the soft glow of chandelier light. Silverware aligned perfectly. Conversations hovered just above a whisper, the language of people who measured time in millions, not minutes. At the center table sat Jonathan Reed, 38, self-made billionaire, the kind of man who never checked his work twice because he never had to. His suit was tailored within a quarter inch. His watch cost more than most cars in the parking garage. And the report in front of him, 73 pages of projections, forecasts, and signatures, was about to finalize a deal worth $480 million. He didn't rush. He never did. He flipped one page at a time, eyes scanning, not searching. There was a difference. Around him, executives waited. No one spoke unless spoken to. Control, in its purest form, looked exactly like this. Across the room, unnoticed, Emily moved between tables with quiet precision. Early 20s. Blonde hair tied back. No jewelry except a thin silver ring. She carried a tray in one hand and a small notepad in the other, though she rarely wrote anything down. She didn't need to. Her eyes did most of the work. Observing, measuring, remembering. To everyone else, she was just part of the background. Efficient, polite, replaceable. The kind of person you forget 5 seconds after she walks away. But when she reached Jonathan's table, something slowed. Not visibly. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Just a fraction of a second. Her eyes moved, not to him, but to the document. One line, buried halfway down the page. A projection column. Clean. Structured. Wrong. She set down his sparkling water without a sound. He didn't look up. Anything else? She asked, her voice steady, neutral. No, he replied, already turning the page. She didn't move. Not immediately. Her fingers tightened, slightly around the edge of the tray. Then, quietly, almost as if speaking to herself, she said, "Sir, that line doesn't balance." The pen in Jonathan's hand paused. Just for a moment. He looked up slowly, not annoyed, not curious, just mildly interrupted. His eyes met hers, scanning, dismissing, categorizing. Waitress. Early 20s. No authority. No relevance. A small smile touched his lips, the kind reserved for harmless mistakes. Stick to serving, he said, calm, effortless, final. Around the table, a few subtle smirks. Not cruel. Just expected. Emily nodded once. No argument. No defense. She reached into her apron, pulled out her notepad, and with a single smooth motion, wrote something down. No hesitation. No calculation. Just certainty. She tore the page cleanly, placed it beside his report, and stepped away. No one followed her with their eyes. No one thought twice. But Jonathan did. Not because of her. Not yet. Because of the way she wrote it. Clean. Precise. Like someone who didn't guess. He glanced down. One number. Adjusted. Simple. Almost insignificant. He exhaled softly, picked up his pen again, then stopped. And for the first time in years, Jonathan Reed looked at his own numbers. Not to confirm them, but to question them. Jonathan Reed did not believe in coincidence. Not in business. Not in numbers. Not in anything that could not be traced, verified, and controlled. His eyes narrowed slightly as he read the line again, then the correction beside it. The original projection showed a steady upward curve, clean and confident, the kind investors trusted without hesitation. The number she wrote was lower. Not dramatically, just enough to feel uncomfortable. Just enough to suggest something deeper was off. He leaned back in his chair, the faint sound of fabric shifting against leather louder than it should have been. Around him, the executives remained still, watching without appearing to watch. No one spoke. They were waiting for him to move forward, to sign, to confirm what they already believed was flawless. Jonathan tapped the pen once against the table. A habit he had trained himself out of years ago. It returned now without permission. He flipped. Back one page. Then another. His eyes moved differently this time. Slower. Not scanning. Checking. The room felt quieter, though nothing had changed. A single decimal point. That was where it started. A rounding adjustment made early in the model. Small. Reasonable. Easy to justify. Except it repeated. Again. And again. Each time slightly adjusted to favor growth. Individually, nothing. Together, a pattern. Jonathan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He reached for his phone and opened the original dataset. Numbers filled the screen. Clean. Ordered. Familiar. And suddenly, questionable. He recalculated one column manually. Then another. The silence stretched. One of the executives shifted in his seat, then quickly stilled. No one interrupted. No one dared. Jonathan exhaled slowly through his nose. Not frustration. Not yet. Recognition. The kind that does not arrive all at once, but builds quietly, piece by piece, until it can no longer be ignored. He glanced again at the small slip of paper. Her handwriting was precise. No corrections. No hesitation marks. Just one clean adjustment, as if the answer had been obvious from the start. He looked up. She was gone. Already at another table, pouring coffee, her posture unchanged, her expression calm, as if nothing significant had happened. As if she had not just interrupted a decision worth nearly $500 million. Jonathan stood. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. Just enough to shift the balance of the room. Chairs adjusted slightly as the others followed his movement with their eyes. "Give me 5 minutes," he said. His voice was steady, but different. Less certain. More deliberate. He picked up the report and walked a few steps away from the table, closer to the window where the city lights reflected faintly against the glass. Outside, traffic moved in quiet lines, unaware of the pause happening above them. Inside, Jonathan Reed did something he had not done in years. He questioned his own system. He ran the numbers again. Fully this time. No shortcuts. No assumptions. Minutes passed. Not many, but enough. When he finished, he did not look surprised. He looked still. The kind of stillness that follows when something shifts too deeply to react to immediately. The model was wrong. Not entirely. Not obviously. But fundamentally. The growth had been inflated. The risk understated. The confidence manufactured. He closed the report slowly. His reflection in the window looked the same. Controlled. Composed. Untouched. But his eyes had changed. Slightly sharper. Slightly quieter. As if something inside had stepped back to make room for a truth he had not expected to find. Jonathan turned his head, scanning the room once more. This time, not for executives. Not for approval. For her. Emily Carter did not look up when he approached. She was refilling a glass at a nearby table, her movements steady, unhurried, as if the world around her had not shifted in the last 5 minutes. Jonathan stopped a few feet away, not speaking immediately. He watched her instead. The way she moved. The way she placed the pitcher down without a sound. The way she acknowledged customers without lingering. There was no performance in it. No need to impress. Just quiet precision. When she finally turned, her eyes met his without surprise. Not curious. Not defensive. Just present. "Sir," she said calmly. No apology. No expectation. Jonathan held the folded report in one hand, the small slip of paper in the other. For a moment, he said nothing. The kind of silence he used to control rooms now felt different. Less like authority. More like hesitation. "You corrected a projection model," he said finally, his voice lower than before, more measured. Without context. Without access to the full data set. Emily glanced briefly at the paper in his hand, then back at him. "I corrected a pattern," she replied. Her tone was even, almost gentle. The line just made it visible. Jonathan studied her face, searching for something familiar. Training. Arrogance. A need to prove herself. He found none of it. Only certainty. The kind that does not ask for permission. "Do you understand what that number represents?" he asked. She nodded once. Compounded growth assumptions adjusted over time to maintain investor confidence. She paused, just slightly. But the base variable was off. Everything after that just followed it. The words landed without force. No emphasis. No attempt to impress. Just clarity. Behind him, one of the executives shifted again, unable to hide the tension any longer. Jonathan did not turn. His attention stayed on her. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. A simple question. Not simple in meaning. Emily looked down for a brief second, as if considering how much to say. Then she met his gaze again. "I used to build models like that," she said. No elaboration. No story. Just a fact, placed quietly between them. Jonathan felt something unfamiliar move beneath his composure. Not doubt. that had already settled in, something closer to recognition. He looked again at the report in his hand, then back at her. The room behind him no longer mattered. The deal, the signatures, the waiting executives, all of it had shifted out of focus. For how long, he asked. Long enough to know where they usually break, she replied. There was no bitterness in her voice, no regret, just distance, as if that version of her existed somewhere else entirely. Jonathan exhaled slowly, the weight of the last few minutes settling into something more solid. He had built an empire on seeing what others missed, on catching flaws before they surfaced, on being right when it mattered most. And yet, this had been there. Not hidden, not complex, just overlooked. He glanced down at the small piece of paper again. One line, one correction, years of assumption behind it. When he looked back up, his expression had changed. Not dramatically, just enough. The certainty was still there, but now it had edges. Emily, he said, reading her name from the receipt still tucked under the report. If I had signed this tonight, he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. She understood. She gave a small nod, almost sympathetic. You would have been consistent, she said quietly. Just not correct. The words did not challenge him. They grounded him. Jonathan Reed, for the first time in a very long time, did not respond immediately. He stood there, holding the weight of a mistake no one else had seen, until someone no one had noticed chose to speak. Jonathan Reed did not return to his table right away. The executives were still waiting, their posture unchanged, their confidence slowly thinning beneath the surface. They had seen him pause before. They had seen him reconsider details, but they had never seen him step away this long without speaking. When he finally turned back, the report was still in his hand, but it no longer looked like a finished document. It looked unfinished. He walked back with measured steps, placing the report down at the center of the table without sitting. The sound of paper against polished wood carried farther than expected. We are not signing tonight, he said. No explanation. No hesitation. Just a decision. A ripple moved through the group. Subtle, controlled, but unmistakable. One of the executives leaned forward slightly. Jonathan, we have already aligned with the investors. The numbers were verified twice. Jonathan nodded once, acknowledging the statement without agreeing to it. They were consistent, he replied calmly. Not accurate. Silence followed. He did not raise his voice. He did not defend his position. He simply opened the report again and turned it toward them, tapping a single line with the tip of his pen. Start here, he said, then follow it back. No one moved immediately, not because they disagreed, because they understood what that meant. Rechecking meant doubt. Doubt meant delay. Delay meant risk. And risk was something they had all been trained to minimize. Jonathan stepped back slightly, creating space, not commanding it. Take the time, he added. If it still holds, we proceed. If it does not, he let the sentence remain unfinished. He did not need to complete it. They understood. One by one, they reached for their copies, flipping pages, their movements less confident now, more deliberate. The room shifted from certainty to calculation, from assumption to verification. Jonathan watched for a moment, then turned away again. Not toward the window this time, toward the quiet rhythm of the dining room. Emily was clearing a table, stacking plates with careful balance, her attention fully on the task in front of her. No glance in his direction, no sign that she was waiting for anything to happen next. He walked over, slower this time, not as a man approaching an answer, but as someone approaching a question he did not yet understand. She sensed him before he spoke. She always did. You changed the outcome of a $480 million decision with one line, he said. His tone carried no disbelief now, only recognition. Emily placed the last plate onto the tray and straightened slightly, meeting his gaze again. No, she replied softly. The outcome was already there. She paused, just long enough for the words to settle. I just pointed to it. Jonathan let that sit in the space between them. He had spent years believing control meant shaping outcomes, directing them, building them from the ground up. But this was different. This was seeing what was already true before anyone else was willing to admit it. Why did you say something? He asked. It was not a test. It was not strategic. It was genuine. Emily looked at him for a moment, then glanced briefly toward the table where his team was now quietly working through the numbers, their earlier confidence replaced by focus. Because you were about to make it official, she said. Her voice remained calm, But there was something deeper beneath it now. Not emotion, not judgment, just clarity. And once it is signed, people stop questioning it. Jonathan followed her gaze, watching his own team re-examine what they had already approved. For the first time, he saw not just their work, but their assumptions. When he looked back at Emily, something in his posture had shifted. Not weaker, not uncertain, just less absolute. "And you?" he asked quietly. "You never stopped questioning it." Emily gave a small, almost unnoticeable shake of her head. "Not when the pattern is that clean," she said. Then, after a brief pause, she added, "Numbers tell the truth. People just decide when to listen." Jonathan Reed did not respond right away. He simply stood there, absorbing a lesson no one in his world had ever taught him so simply, so quietly, and somehow, so completely. The first sign came quietly. A chair shifted, then another. Papers turned faster now, not with confidence, but with urgency carefully disguised as diligence. One of the executives adjusted his glasses and leaned closer to the table, his finger tracing a column he had approved less than 30 minutes ago. His expression did not change immediately. It tightened, just slightly, enough for Jonathan to notice from across the room. He did not interrupt. He did not step in. He simply watched, the same way Emily had, patient, observing, waiting for the truth to surface on its own. "This does not reconcile," one of them said finally, his voice controlled, but lower than before. Another executive flipped back 3 pages, then 5. "The baseline assumption is off," he added, almost to himself. No one looked at Jonathan now. They looked at the numbers. The room had shifted completely. It no longer revolved around authority. It revolved around accuracy. Jonathan felt it, not as a loss of control, but as something more precise. A correction. He turned his head slightly, his eyes finding Emily again across the room. She was at the register now, processing a payment, her attention fully present, as if this moment had nothing to do with her. No glance, no acknowledgement, just quiet distance. As if she had already stepped out of the outcome she set in motion. Behind him, the voices grew more certain, but in a different way than before. "If this holds, the projected return drops by at least 12%. That affects the entire valuation. We would have overcommit." Each statement landed with more weight than the last. Not because they were louder, because they were true. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly, not in frustration, in clarity. For years, he had built his reputation on catching what others missed, on being the one who saw through flawed logic before it became costly. But somewhere along the way, consistency had replaced curiosity, patterns had replaced questions, and no one around him had challenged it. Not because they could not, because they did not. Until tonight. He opened his eyes again, steady, grounded, and turned back toward the table. "Stop," he said calmly. The room fell silent immediately. Not out of fear, out of attention. "We rebuild the model from the base variable," he continued. "No adjustments, no assumptions carried forward. Clean start." One of the executives nodded slowly, already reaching for his laptop. Another closed his folder, no longer pretending the document in front of him was complete. The deal was no longer imminent. It was uncertain, and for the first time, that uncertainty felt necessary. Jonathan placed the report down, this time not as a decision waiting to be confirmed, but as a problem waiting to be understood. He stepped away once more, his movement quieter now, less defined by position, more by intention. When he reached the edge of the dining area, he stopped again. Not because he needed to, because he chose to. Emily was finishing her shift. He could see it in the way she moved now, resetting tables, aligning chairs, closing small loops with the same care she applied to everything else. No rush. No need to stay longer than required. Jonathan watched her for a moment, longer than before. Not as a curiosity, not as an anomaly, as someone who had seen something he had not, and had said it anyway. When she finally turned, sensing his presence again, her expression did not change. Calm, balanced, unmoved by everything unfolding behind him. Jonathan took a small step closer, his voice quieter now, stripped of everything unnecessary. "You saw it in seconds," he said. "Not a question, a fact." Emily nodded once. "It was already there," she replied. Same words, same tone, but this time, they carried further. Jonathan held her gaze for a moment, then gave a slight nod of his own. Not approval, not acknowledgement of status. Something simpler. Respect. And in that quiet exchange, something shifted again. Not in the room, not in the numbers. In him. He had spent years trusting systems, teams, and proven patterns. Tonight, one unseen voice had done what none of them had. It had made him stop, and for the first time in a long time, truly look. The restaurant had begun to thin out. Conversations softened. Chairs emptied. The quiet rhythm of closing time settled in, subtle but steady. Outside, the city lights stretched across the glass like a reflection that never asked to be noticed. Inside, something had already changed. At the table behind him, the sound of typing replaced conversation. Laptops open. Jackets slightly loosened. No one checked their phones anymore. No one spoke about timelines or investor expectations. They were rebuilding. Carefully. From the beginning. Jonathan stood near the edge of the room, not leading, not directing. Listening. For once, he allowed the process to happen without inserting himself into every step. It felt unfamiliar. Not uncomfortable. Just different. He glanced down at his watch, then back at the table. 15 minutes had passed. It felt longer. One of the analysts finally looked up, his expression no longer guarded. It was clear now. The corrected baseline shifts everything, he said. No one challenged him. No one needed to. Another voice followed, quieter. If we had signed tonight, we would have locked in the error across all future projections. Jonathan nodded once, absorbing it without reaction. The weight of it was not in the number. It was in the pattern. Years of trust placed in a system that had slowly drifted away from accuracy. Not through negligence. Through repetition. Through assumption. Through the quiet belief that what worked yesterday would still hold today. He turned again, his eyes finding Emily near the back, tying her apron loose, preparing to leave. The simplicity of the moment stood in contrast to everything unfolding around him. No urgency. No need to stay. Her part was done. He walked toward her, this time without hesitation. Not as a man seeking answers. As someone acknowledging where they came from. You were not guessing, he said as he approached. Not a question. A realization spoken out loud. Emily finished folding the apron and placed it neatly on the counter before responding. No, she said simply. Jonathan studied her for a moment, then asked the question he had not yet allowed himself to fully consider. Why are you here? It was not about the restaurant, not about the uniform. It was about the distance between what she knew and where she stood. Emily did not answer immediately. She reached for her bag, sliding the strap over her shoulder with the same calm precision she had shown all evening. Then she looked at him. Not defensive, not evasive, just honest. Because this is where I needed to be, she said. The answer did not explain anything. And somehow, it explained everything. Jonathan held her gaze, searching for more. Not details. Not credentials. Context. You could be anywhere, he said quietly. Emily gave a small nod. So could you, she replied. The words landed without weight, but they shifted something deeper. Not a challenge. A mirror. Jonathan exhaled slowly, a breath he did not realize he had been holding. For years, he had believed position defined perspective, that where you stood determined what you could see. But tonight had proven something else entirely. Perspective came from how you looked, and she had looked where no one else had. Behind him, the sound of a chair moving broke the moment. Jonathan, one of the executives called, his voice steady now, grounded in something new. We need to talk about the revised numbers. Jonathan did not turn immediately. He kept his focus on Emily for one last second. You changed more than the model tonight, he said. Not as praise. As fact. Emily adjusted the strap of her bag slightly, her expression unchanged. No, she said softly. You just decided to see it. There was no follow-up. No lingering moment. She turned and walked toward the exit, her steps quiet, unhurried, as if nothing about the night needed to be carried with her. Jonathan watched her go, not trying to stop her, not trying to extend the moment. Some things were not meant to be held, only understood. When the door closed behind her, the room felt the same. But it was not. He turned back toward his team, toward the numbers, toward the work waiting to be done. Only now, the certainty was gone. In its place, something better. Awareness. And this time, he did not rush to fill the silence. He let it stay. Because for the first time in years, it was telling him the truth. The door closed softly behind Emily, but the effect of her presence did not leave with her. It lingered, not in the air, not in the room, but in the way Jonathan Reed now looked at everything in front of him. He walked back to the table, slower than before, not carrying authority, but something quieter. His team looked up as he approached, their expressions no longer certain, no longer defensive. They had seen it now. The flaw, the pattern, the truth that had been sitting in plain sight, waiting for someone willing to question it. Jonathan did not sit immediately. He placed both hands on the edge of the table, leaning forward slightly, his eyes moving across each of them. Not to judge, to understand. "How long has this adjustment been in place?" he asked. His voice was calm, but there was a new precision in it, sharper than before. One of the senior analysts hesitated, then answered. "Approximately 3 years," he said. "It started as a minor correction during a volatility cycle. It was maintained for consistency." Jonathan nodded once. Consistency. The word felt different now. Less like reliability. More like repetition without reflection. "And no one questioned it," he continued. There was no accusation in his tone. That made it heavier. The analyst lowered his gaze slightly. "It aligned with expected outcomes," he said. Another voice added quietly. "And it passed internal review." Jonathan exhaled slowly, straightening his posture. For years, those answers would have been enough. Alignment, review, confirmation. The system had worked because everyone believed it did. Until it did not. He pulled out a chair and sat down, not at the head of the table, but slightly to the side. A small shift, easy to miss, but it changed the dynamic. He was no longer above the process. He was inside it. "Walk me through it again," he said. Not as a command, as a request. The team exchanged brief glances, then began. This time, there was no rush. No assumption that the outcome was already known. Each number was explained. Each variable traced back to its origin. The conversation moved slower, but it moved deeper. Jonathan listened, fully, without interrupting, without finishing their sentences, without jumping ahead. It was unfamiliar, and it worked. Minutes passed, then more. The model began to take shape again, cleaner now, stripped of the layers that had built up over time. The projections were lower. The risk was clearer. The confidence honest. Jonathan leaned back slightly, his eyes still on the screen in front of him. The numbers no longer told the story he had expected, but they told the truth. And that was enough. "We present this version," he said finally. "No adjustments." One of the executives hesitated. "The investors will push back," he said carefully. Jonathan nodded. "Then they push back," he replied. Simple, direct, final. There was no need to defend accuracy, only to stand by it. The room settled into a new kind of silence. Not uncertain, not tense, focused, grounded. One by one, the team closed their old documents, replacing them with the revised model. No one mentioned the earlier version again. It no longer mattered. What mattered was what they saw now. Jonathan glanced briefly toward the entrance, the space where Emily had stood only minutes before. Empty now, but not forgotten. He turned back to the table, his voice quieter as he spoke again. "From now on," he said, "we do not just check if it works." He paused, just long enough for them to listen. "We ask why it works." No one argued. No one needed clarification. They understood. The meeting did not end with a signature. It ended with something else. A reset. Not of the deal, of the way they saw it. And as Jonathan Reed sat there, surrounded by numbers that finally made sense, he realized something he had not considered before. The most expensive mistake is not the one you make. It is the one you stop looking for. The meeting ended without applause, without handshakes, without the usual quiet celebration that followed a deal of that size. Laptops closed. Chairs slid back. One by one, the executives gathered their things, not with the satisfaction of completion, but with the awareness of something narrowly avoided. Outside, the night had deepened. The city moved on, unchanged, unaware that a decision worth hundreds of millions had been paused by a single line no one else had questioned. Jonathan Reed remained seated after the others left. The table was nearly empty now, except for the revised report and the original copy placed beside it. Two versions of the same story. One polished, one true. He reached for the older report and flipped through it slowly, page by page, his fingers brushing against numbers that had once felt certain. They looked different now. Not incorrect at first glance. Just incomplete. He stopped at the line. The one that had shifted everything. It sat there quietly, unchanged on the printed page, as if nothing had ever been wrong with it. As if it had not almost defined the future of an entire deal. Jonathan closed the report and leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting toward the entrance again. Empty. Still. The space where Emily had stood now held nothing but reflection. He checked his watch. 10:43 p.m. Her shift had ended at 10:30. She would be gone by now. Not waiting. Not expecting anything to follow. That was what stayed with him the most. She had not corrected him for recognition. Not for reward. Not even for acknowledgement. She had simply seen something and said it. Then left. Jonathan stood slowly, picking up both reports, and walked toward the front of the restaurant. The staff was finishing closing procedures, wiping down surfaces, stacking chairs, resetting the space for tomorrow. A different rhythm now. Quiet. Practical. Real. He approached the counter where the manager was reviewing receipts. "The waitress who was on my table tonight," Jonathan said. His voice carried no urgency, just intention. The manager looked up, slightly cautious. "Emily?" he asked. Jonathan nodded once. "Is she still here?" The manager glanced toward the back, then shook his head. "She left about 10 minutes ago," he said. "She always leaves right on time." Jonathan absorbed that without reaction. Of course she did. Precision did not end with numbers. "Do you have her contact information?" he asked. The question hung for a brief moment. The manager hesitated, not out of refusal, but uncertainty. "I'm not sure I can give that out," he said carefully. Jonathan nodded, accepting the boundary without pushing it. "Then give her this," he said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a business card. Clean. Minimal. His private number written on the back. Not his assistant. Not his office. Direct. The manager took it, glancing down briefly before nodding. "I will make sure she gets it," he said. Jonathan placed the reports on the counter for a second, adjusting them so they aligned perfectly. Old habit. Then he picked them up again. "Thank you," he added, his tone quiet, sincere. Not transactional. The manager gave a small nod in return, slightly surprised by the simplicity of it. Jonathan turned and walked toward the exit, the weight of the reports in his hand different now. Not pressure. Not expectation. Just information. Outside, the air was cooler, the kind that sharpens thought without demanding attention. His car was waiting at the curb, engine running, driver already stepping out to open the door. Jonathan paused for a brief second before getting in, his eyes lifting once more to the restaurant window. From the outside, nothing about the place suggested anything remarkable had happened inside. Just another night. Another service. Another set of customers. He stepped into the car and sat back, the door closing softly behind him. As the vehicle pulled away, the city lights reflected across the glass once more. Moving. Uninterrupted. And somewhere in that movement, Jonathan Reed realized something that would stay with him far longer than the deal itself. The most valuable insight does not announce itself. It appears quietly, and leaves just as quietly, unless you decide to follow it. The next morning arrived without ceremony. No headlines. No alerts. No public trace of what had nearly happened the night before. But inside Jonathan Reed's office, everything felt different. The glass walls reflected the early light of the city, clean and sharp, but his attention was not on the skyline. It was on the revised model displayed across 3 monitors, each number reviewed again, each assumption rebuilt from the ground up. The projections were lower, the margins tighter, the certainty honest. He stood there for a moment, coffee untouched on the desk, simply looking. Not scanning. Not approving. Understanding. Behind him, the door opened quietly. "The investors are ready for the call," his assistant said. Jonathan nodded once. "Send them the updated version," he replied. No hesitation. No negotiation. The assistant paused slightly. "They may ask why the numbers changed overnight," she added carefully. Jonathan allowed a small, almost imperceptible shift in his expression. "Then we tell them the truth," he said. Simple. Direct. Enough. The call lasted 37 minutes. There were questions. Of course there were. Pushback. Expected. Some resistance. Predictable. But Jonathan did not adjust. He did not soften the numbers to make them easier to accept. He did not return to the version that felt more comfortable. He stayed with what was accurate. When the call ended, there was no applause. No immediate agreement. Just something quieter. Respect. The kind that does not come from confidence, but from clarity. Hours later, after meetings, after reviews, after the steady rhythm of a day rebuilt on a different foundation, Jonathan found himself standing at his desk again. The business card he had left the night before was no longer in his pocket. It was somewhere else now. With her. Or not. He did not know. And for once, he did not try to control the outcome. His phone remained still. No call. No message. No response. He accepted that. Not as rejection. As distance. Some things did not return immediately. Some things were not meant to. He turned his attention back to the report, but this time, something subtle had changed in the way he read it. He no longer looked for confirmation. He looked for friction, for the small inconsistencies that most people overlooked, for the quiet signals that something deeper might be off. And in that shift, he realized the real cost of the mistake he had almost made. It was not the money, not the deal, not even the risk. It was the years he had spent trusting what felt right, instead of questioning what was true. Across the city, in a smaller space, far from glass offices and investor calls, Emily Carter stepped into her next shift. Same uniform, same quiet rhythm. Nothing outward had changed. She tied her apron, picked up her notepad, and moved into the room with the same calm presence as before. A manager approached her briefly, handing her a small envelope. "This came for you," he said. No explanation. No emphasis. Emily took it, glancing at it for a second before slipping it into her bag without opening it. Her expression did not shift. Not curiosity. Not urgency. Just acceptance. Another table needed water. Another order needed to be taken. She moved forward, just as she always did. Somewhere between those two spaces, separated by distance but connected by a single moment, something remained. Not a transaction. Not an opportunity. Something quieter. A line that had been corrected. A pattern that had been seen. A truth that had been acknowledged. And in the space between power and silence, between assumption and clarity, one thing had changed permanently. He did not become less powerful. He became more aware. And she did not become more visible. She remained exactly who she was. But from that day on, one thing stayed with him, long after the numbers were finalized, long after the deal found its true shape. The most dangerous mistake is not being wrong. It is being so certain that no one feels allowed to correct you.